A rich woman mocked an older lady in a store queue, but she had no idea that this woman was an authoritative judge who would decide her fate the very next day. Ashley, a picture of wealth and beauty, found herself out of place at the local grocery store. Anxiety gnawed at her heart thundering like a wild drum against her ribcage. The line to the checkout was moving painfully slow, each tick of the clock exacerbating her impatience. The woman in front of her, an elderly lady with a kind face, was fumbling with her bank card. "Madam, your card isn't working," the cashier explained patiently, attempting another swipe. The elderly woman looked flustered, confusion etched on her wrinkled face. Ashley's patience wore thin. She huffed, tapping her designer shoe on the floor, a clear expression of her irritation. "Can you hurry up, please?" she snapped, her voice laced with annoyance. The elderly woman turned, her eyebrows knitting together in surprise. "I'm sorry, dear, I'm trying my best," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. Ashley scoffed, her eyes flashing with impatience. "Your best is clearly not enough," she retorted, her voice cold and cutting. Without waiting for a response, she shoved past the elderly woman, ignoring the gasps of shock from the others in line. As she pushed her way to the front, she missed the hurt look in the elderly woman's eyes, a look that would soon come to haunt her. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the imposing courthouse, casting a harsh light on the reality that Ashley was about to face. She was a woman of considerable wealth, yet her heart was in the grips of an impoverishing fear. Her estranged husband, a formidable figure in the city's upper echelons, was fighting for full custody of their precious son. The thought alone was enough to make her heart squeeze painfully in her chest. She walked into the courtroom, her eyes immediately finding the small figure of her son sitting at a distance. His innocent eyes met hers, his confusion and uncertainty reflecting her own fears. A lump formed in her throat as she was forced a reassuring smile onto her face, her heart aching at the sight of him so far away from her. Her husband, impeccably dressed, stood in conversation with his lawyer. At her entrance, he turned to look at her, his gaze icy, devoid of the love that once resided there. A surge of emotions welled up inside her, a mix of anger, betrayal, and a chilling sense of foreboding. "You won't get away with this, Richard," she muttered under her breath, clutching her handbag tighter. As she took her seat, her gaze drifted to the judge's bench and her heart almost stopped. The elderly woman from the grocery store, the one she had callously insulted, was seated there. The realization hit her like a punch in the gut, the taste of regret bitter on her tongue. Her mind raced back to the grocery store, the elderly woman's hurt face, and Ashley's rash behavior. She felt a cold dread creeping over her. Had she just sealed her own fate? A wave of remorse washed over her, her past actions coming back to haunt her at the worst possible time. She felt her vision blur with unshed tears. She wanted to apologize, to undo what she'd done, but it was too late. All she could do now was face the consequences of her actions, praying for a miracle that seemed more and more unlikely. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the proceedings kicked off. Ashley sat, her heart pounding in her chest, her clammy hands clasped tightly in her lap. The whole world seemed to shrink to this one room, this one moment. Every murmur, every rustle of paper seemed amplified, echoing her escalating anxiety. The lawyers presented their cases, each argument a painful blow to Ashley's already fragile state. Her husband's lawyer painted a picture of her as an irresponsible mother, a woman more concerned with her social life than her young son. Ashley clenched her teeth, resisting the urge to shout back, to defend her love for her son that no one could possibly understand. Her lawyer rebutted, arguing her dedication as a mother and the bond she had with her son. But with every passing second, Ashley felt her hope shrinking, a tiny flame flickering in the face of a raging storm. Throughout the proceedings, Judge Lauren sat impassively, her face an unreadable mask. Her eyes, however, held a sharp intensity, missing nothing. She asked pointed questions, her voice stern but fair, and though she was the woman Ashley had insulted, her conduct was nothing but professional. The room seemed to hold its breath as Judge Lauren called for a brief recess before the verdict. Ashley sat, her body numb. She glanced at her son, his small figure hunched in his chair, his eyes wide with fear. A lump formed in her throat. What if she lost him? Though the thought was unbearable, a reality too cruel to contemplate. As the courtroom filled up again, Ashley felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The hushed whispers, the shuffle of feet, everything seemed to blur as Judge Lauren took her place at the bench. The elderly woman looked down at her, her gaze devoid of the hurt and surprise from the previous day. She looked every bit the judge, the arbiter of justice, the one who held Ashley's fate in her hands. Ashley held her breath, her hands clasping each other so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The room fell silent, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. She closed her eyes, her mind filled with the image of her son's face. His laughter, his hugs, his innocent questions. She couldn't lose him, she just couldn't. Judge Lauren's voice broke through the deafening silence. "Custody of the child is awarded to the mother." The words echoed in the room, a lifeline through to Ashley in her sea of despair. She opened her eyes, hardly daring to believe what she'd just heard. She looked at Judge Lauren, her eyes wide with shock and relief. "And," Judge Lauren continued, her stern gaze shifting to Ashley's husband, "Mr. Richards, you are hereby reprimanded for the attempted bribery of the jury, a grave offense that the court will not take lightly." A gasp went through the room, the shock palpable. Ashley's husband looked visibly shaking, his confident demeanor crumbling. Tears welled up in Ashley's eyes, relief washing over her like a cleansing rain. She felt her body sag, the tension of the past days leaving her in a rush. She looked at her son, his own eyes filled with tears, his small shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. Her heart ached at the sight, a painful reminder of what they've both been through. She wished she could rush over and envelop him in a hug, reassure him that it was all over. But for now, all she could do was smile through her tears, a silent promise to her son that things would get better. She nodded at Judge Lauren, her gratitude evident in her gaze. Despite her initial fear, justice had been served, and for that, Ashley would be forever grateful. The following day dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm that had been raging in Ashley's life. Her heart was lighter, her step more confident as she waited outside the courthouse, her gaze scanning the crowd for one particular face, the face of the woman who'd given back her son. When Judge Lauren finally emerged from the courthouse, Ashley felt a lump in her throat. She walked over to her heart pounding with a mix of gratitude and apprehension. "Judge Lauren," she began, her voice trembling slightly. The elderly woman turned, her eyebrows raising in surprise. Ashley took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I wanted to say thank you. You gave me back my son, the most precious thing in my life. I don't know how I can ever repay you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. Judge Lauren looked at her for a long moment, her gaze unreadable, then nodded. "You're welcome," she said simply, her tone softening slightly. Ashley hesitated, her mind circling back to the grocery store incident. "And I wanted to apologize," she continued, her eyes meeting Judge Lauren's. "What I did at the grocery store was inexcusable. I was wrong and I'm truly sorry." Judge Lauren nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "I appreciate your apology," she said, her voice gentle. "But why did you help me?" Ashley asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. "After how I treated you, why?" Judge Lauren smiled, a small knowing smile. "Firstly," she began, her tone steady, "the law was on your side, and as a judge I can't let personal matters influence my decisions." She paused, her gaze turning introspective. "And secondly," she continued, her voice softer now, "I've been where you are. I've had 4 husbands, all of whom were less than kind. And I have 5 children for whom I would fight for with everything I have. So I understand you more than you realize. But," she added, her gaze turning stern again, "let this be a lesson to you. Your actions have consequences and you were lucky this time, but life won't always be so forgiving. You need to change your attitude towards others, Ashley. You never know when you'll need their help." Ashley nodded, her eyes welling up again. She knew Judge Lauren was right. She had learned a valuable lesson, one that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. She thanked Judge Lauren once again before leaving, a newfound resolve strengthening her. She would be better for herself and for her son because they both deserved it.